I am Carly Monroe, 13, and literally that night, my dream of being enough for my family, it shattered worse than my hand. The music I'd poured my heart into, practicing guitar until my fingers bled, it blew up into a nightmare in our dimly lit garage. My father, red-faced and reeking of whiskey, demanded I stop wasting time and focus on supporting my sister, the miracle child. When I snapped back, refusing to quit, his eyes went dark. He grabbed the hammer from his workbench, and before I could move, he brought it down on my left hand. The crack echoed louder than my scream, pain exploding like fireworks. "You'll learn your place," he roared as my mother and sister stood frozen in the doorway, not a word between them. But here's the truth. That blow didn't break me. It lit a fire. I wasn't just going to survive. I was going to burn their world down and build my own. Drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. Hit subscribe, and stay with me for the most satisfying revenge you'll ever hear, because you won't believe what I did once that hammer fell. The pain was a living thing, clawing through my bones as I cradled my mangled hand, blood seeping between my fingers. I stumbled back, hitting the cold concrete floor, my guitar toppling from its stand with a hollow twang. My father loomed over me, hammer still in his grip, his breath heavy with rage and regret he'd never admit. My mother's voice, sharp but distant, cut through the haze. "Carly, you provoked him." My sister, Lily, the golden child they'd always worshipped, just stared, her wide eyes glistening but empty of help. I wanted to scream at them, to demand why my dreams were always less than her perfect report cards, her piano recitals, her everything. But I didn't. I bit down on the pain, my teeth grinding, and let the silence swallow my fury. The hospital was a blur of antiseptic and lies. My mother spun a story about an accident with a toolbox, her manicured nails tapping nervously as she spoke to the doctor. I sat there, my hand wrapped in gauze, feeling the weight of their stares. Nurses, doctors, even the janitor mopping the floor. They knew. I could see it in the way their eyes lingered, but no one asked. I was invisible, just like always. The doctor said I'd never play guitar again. Not with the bones crushed beyond repair. My mother sighed as if it was my fault for inconveniencing her. My father didn't even show up. Lily, clutching her stuffed bunny, whispered, "I'm sorry, but it was too late." That night, alone in my hospital bed, the beeping machines my only company, I made a vow. They'd pay, not with violence but with truth. Back home, the garage became a ghost I avoided. My guitar sat untouched, a relic of a life they'd tried to crush. But I wasn't done. I started watching them, really watching. My father's late-night business calls behind locked doors, the way his hands shook when he poured his third drink. My mother's fake smiles at church, her whispered gossip about neighbors she called friends. Lily, always perfect, always praised, but I saw her sneak out at night, meeting boys she'd never tell our parents about. I kept a notebook, hidden under my mattress, where I scribbled every detail. Dates, times, words overheard through thin walls. It wasn't just anger driving me, it was survival. I needed to understand why I was the outcast, why my love for music, for creating, was a sin in their eyes. School was my escape, but even there I was the quiet one, the girl with the brace on her hand and shadows in her eyes. Teachers pitied me, classmates ignored me. But in the library I found something better than pity. Purpose. A dusty book on audio engineering tucked between novels caught my eye. It was technical, dense, but it spoke to me. Sound could tell stories, capture truth, expose lies. I checked it out, hiding it in my backpack like contraband. At night, while my family slept, I read by flashlight, memorizing terms like mixing and equalization. I didn't have equipment, but I had time, I had rage, and I had a plan forming, jagged and raw, like the scars on my hand. My family thought they'd broken me that night in the garage. They didn't know they'd forged a weapon. I stopped talking back, stopped begging for their approval. Instead, I listened. I watched. I waited. Every slight, every lie, every moment they lifted Lily up while shoving me down, it all went into my notebook. I didn't know how I'd use it yet, but I knew it would be big. It would be loud, and it would be mine. The pain in my hand throbbed as I wrote, a constant reminder of what they'd done. But it also reminded me of what I'd become. Not their victim, but their reckoning. The hospital lights had faded, but the ache in my hand lingered, a constant pulse syncing with my heartbeat as I sat through another family dinner a year later. My notebook was thicker now, pages creased from late-night scribbling, but I kept my head down, fork scraping against the plate as my family's voices filled the dining room. Lily, 15 and glowing, was the center of it all. Always was. "Top of her class again?" my mother beamed, passing the mashed potatoes to my father, who nodded like he'd personally sculpted her perfection. I chewed slowly, my braced hand hidden under the table, and remembered the times they'd never seen me, the times they'd erased me. Flash back to when I was 10, standing on the school auditorium stage, my first poem clutched in sweaty hands. I'd spent weeks writing it, each word carved from the quiet places in my heart where music and stories lived. The crowd clapped politely. A few teachers smiled, but when I stepped off stage, my mother was already checking her phone. "Lily's piano recital is next week," she said, not even looking at me. "We need to get her dress fitted." My father didn't show up at all. Some meeting, always a meeting. I folded the poem into my pocket, its edges crumpling like my pride. That night, I heard them laughing in the living room, praising Lily's natural talent, while I sat alone in my room, strumming my guitar until my fingers ached. Another memory, sharper, at 12. I'd won a school art contest, my drawing of a stormy sea pinned to the community center wall. It was the first time I'd felt seen, like my hands could create something worth noticing. I begged my parents to come to the award ceremony. "It's just a little thing," my mother said, brushing me off as she helped Lily with her science fair project. My father grunted, "Focus on something useful, Carly." I went alone, the cheap plastic trophy heavy in my hands as I walked home under streetlights. When I showed it to them, my mother glanced up from her magazine. "That's nice, honey," she said, but her eyes were back on the page before I could respond. Lily's science fair ribbon, though? That got framed, hung above the fireplace like a shrine. I blinked back to the dinner table, my jaw tight. Lily was talking now, her voice bright, recounting some debate team victory. My father leaned forward, hanging on her every word, while my mother nodded, her smile wide enough to crack. I pushed a pea around my plate, my braced hand stiff under the table. They didn't ask about my day, my grades, my anything. I was the shadow in their spotlight, the one who didn't fit their mold of perfection. But I remembered every moment they'd overlooked me. The time I fixed the neighbor's radio at 11, earning a $20 bill and a pat on the head, they didn't care. The late nights I spent teaching myself chords, my fingers calloused but strong, worthless to them. Each memory was a brick in the wall I was building, not to shut them out but to stand taller than their neglect. I sipped my water, the glass cold against my lips, and let their voices wash over me. My father's laugh too loud as he recounted Lily's latest triumph. My mother's cooing, "We're so proud of you, sweetheart." I didn't flinch, didn't speak, I just listened, my good hand twitching toward the notebook I wished I could pull out right there. I'd caught my father's business calls last week. Hushed and angry. Something about moving funds before anyone noticed. My mother's charity luncheons, all smiles for the church crowd, but I'd overheard her on the phone, laughing about skimming donations. Lily wasn't innocent either. Her late-night escapades were more than just teenage rebellion, whispers of deals and secrets I hadn't fully pieced together yet. I wrote it all down, every word, every glance they thought I didn't see. The dinner dragged on, and I stayed quiet, my braced hand a heavy reminder under the table. They thought I was nothing, a broken thing to pity or ignore. But I wasn't broken, I was building. Every slight, every dismissal was fuel. I didn't need their praise, I needed their secrets, and I was getting better at finding them. The library book on audio engineering was my lifeline now, its pages dog-eared from nights spent studying under my blanket. I didn't have a studio, but I had a cheap, second-hand recorder I'd bought with babysitting money, hidden in my closet. I practiced capturing sounds, my voice, the creak of the house, the way my father's footsteps slowed when he thought no one was listening. I was learning to make the truth loud, undeniable. As my mother cleared the plates, still chattering about Lily's future, I slipped away to my room. My notebook waited, its pages a map of their hypocrisy. I wrote down the night's details, the way my father's hand lingered on his wineglass, the flicker of guilt in Lily's eyes when she mentioned her study group. They thought they were untouchable, their perfect family a fortress. But I was inside, silent and unseen, planting the seeds of their downfall. My hand ached as I wrote, but it wasn't pain anymore. It was power. The library's fluorescent lights buzzed faintly as I hunched over my secret, a cracked laptop I'd borrowed from school, its screen glowing with a free audio editing program I'd found online. It was 2 years after the hammer fell, and I was 15, my braced hand clumsy but steady as I clicked through tutorials in the library's corner, earbuds in, world out. That night, I had my aha moment. The realization that sound wasn't just music, it was a weapon, a way to carve truth into the air and make people listen. My family thought they'd silenced me, but I was building something louder than they could imagine. A podcast, still just a spark in my mind, that would expose their lies. My fingers trembled as I dragged a sound clip into the software, my voice shaky but clear, testing a script I'd written in my notebook. What happens when the perfect family isn't perfect at all? The struggle was real, and it wasn't just the tech. I had no money, no mentor, no one to guide me through the maze of audio engineering. The library's books were outdated, and the free software crashed every 10 minutes, eating my progress. My braced hand made typing slow, each keystroke a reminder of that night in the garage. But every crash, every ache pushed me harder. I'd sneak into the school's computer lab after hours, the janitor's keys jangling down the hall as I taught myself to layer tracks, adjust levels, cut noise. I recorded snippets in my closet, my voice muffled by old clothes to keep it from reaching my family's ears. My father's late-night calls, my mother's whispered schemes, Lily's secret meetups, I captured what I could, piecing together their hypocrisy like a puzzle. The breakthrough came one night when I stumbled on a free online course, some college professor's passion project. It was a goldmine. Lessons on storytelling through sound, mixing techniques, even how to distribute a podcast anonymously. I soaked it up, my notebook filling with terms like compression and bitrate. I practiced with my cheap recorder, capturing the hum of our fridge, the creak of my bedroom floor, turning ordinary sounds into a story. My first test episode was rough, just me talking about a fictional family, but it felt alive. I played it back, my voice steady despite the brace weighing down my hand, and for the first time, I felt powerful. I wasn't just Carly, the invisible daughter. I was creating something that could shake their world. I kept it hidden, always. My laptop stayed locked in a box under my bed, my recorder tucked behind a loose baseboard. My family didn't notice my late nights or the way I'd linger near their conversations, my good hand ready to jot down anything incriminating. My father's business was shadier than I'd thought. Overheard fragments about offshore accounts, names I didn't recognize but wrote down anyway. My mother's charity work was a front. I caught her on the phone, laughing about redirecting funds to a private account. Lily was the surprise. Her study groups were covers for meeting a guy tied to her school's drug scene, whispers of deals I couldn't fully grasp but recorded anyway. Each secret was a brick in my foundation. My podcast taking shape in my mind, a series that would lay their lives bare, anonymous but undeniable. The library became my sanctuary, the only place I could work without fear of being caught. I'd sit in the same corner, my hoodie up, earbuds in, editing clips until my eyes burned. I learned to mask my voice, layering effects to make it unrecognizable. I wrote scripts that wove truth into a narrative, careful to obscure details that could trace back to me. It was slow, maddening work. My hand ached from typing, my head throbbed from late nights, but every step felt like defiance. I wasn't just learning audio engineering, I was forging a key to my freedom. The podcast wasn't just a project, it was my rebellion, my proof that they hadn't broken me. By the time I was 16, I had a rough draft, 10 episodes, each one a piece of their hypocrisy, backed by recordings I'd risked everything to get. I tested uploads on a burner account, my heart pounding as I watched the files load, anonymous and safe. The library's Wi-Fi was slow, but it worked. I didn't release anything yet. I wasn't ready. But I knew I was close. My family thought I was nothing, a quiet girl with a broken hand and no future. They didn't see the hours I'd poured into this, the way I'd turned their neglect into my strength. My notebook was nearly full now, pages dense with their secrets. I'd catch my father's eye sometimes, his gaze dismissive, and I'd smile to myself, knowing what I held. That night, as I saved my latest edit and shut the laptop, my good hand brushed the brace on my left. The pain was duller now, but the memory was sharp. I thought of the garage, the hammer, the silence of my mother and sister. They thought that moment had defined me. They were wrong. It had created me. I slipped my earbuds into my pocket, the library quiet except for the hum of the lights, and walked home under the stars, my plan humming louder than ever. The night before my high school graduation, I sat cross-legged on my bedroom floor, my laptop casting a faint glow as I finalized the first episode of my anonymous podcast, my finger hovering over the upload button. I was 18 now, the weight of my braced hand familiar but heavy as I double-checked the files, recordings of my father's shady deals, my mother's fake charity calls, Lily's whispered meetups, all woven into a narrative that would shred their perfect facade. My room was a fortress of secrets, my notebook, bursting with 4 years of evidence, hidden under the floorboard, my recorder, tucked behind a vent, my heart, pounding with the certainty that tomorrow, at the family gathering they'd insisted I attend, I'd set everything in motion. I wasn't just graduating, I was launching a war. The podcast was ready, 10 episodes scheduled to drop anonymously over the next week, each one a scalpel to their lies. I'd used every trick I'd learned, voice modulation to hide my identity, careful edits to obscure traceable details, a hosting platform that promised anonymity. I'd also compiled a digital folder, emails, recordings, screenshots of my father's business texts I'd swiped from his phone when he was passed out drunk. That folder was my insurance, set to send to the church board, the local newspaper, and a lawyer I'd found online if anything went wrong. My good hand trembled as I encrypted it, my braced hand resting on the floor, a reminder of why I was doing this. Tomorrow I'd face them one last time before the world heard the truth. I leaned back against my bed, the familiar creak of the house settling around me. Downstairs, my mother was probably polishing silverware for the gathering, her voice sharp as she barked orders at Lily. My father would be in his study, muttering into his phone about investments that never added up. I'd heard enough to know their empire was crumbling, debts piling up, whispers of audits. They thought this gathering, a post-graduation celebration, would be another stage for Lily's brilliance, another chance to parade their perfection. They didn't know I'd be there, silent but armed, my podcast ready to detonate their world. I closed my laptop, my breath catching as I imagined their faces when the first episode hit. I'd titled it The Perfect Family, a bitter nod to the image they clung to. The script was tight, my modulated voice calm but cutting, laying out their hypocrisy without naming them yet. I'd spent months perfecting it, recording in stolen moments when the house was empty, my closet a makeshift studio. My braced hand ached from hours of editing, but every twinge felt like defiance. I pictured my father's smug grin fading, my mother's manicured hands shaking, Lily's perfect mask cracking. They'd ignored me for years, but they wouldn't ignore this. The gathering was at our house, a sprawling colonial they'd leveraged to the hilt to keep up appearances. I'd overheard my mother on the phone crowing about how it would show everyone we're still on top. I knew better. My notebook held proof of their financial lies, mortgage payments missed, loans from shady sources. I'd even recorded my father yelling at a creditor last month, his voice slurred but desperate. Tomorrow I'd play the dutiful daughter one last time, smiling through their jabs, knowing what was coming. My folder was queued to send at midnight, the podcast set to drop an hour later. I'd be at the gathering when it hit, watching their phones light up with notifications. I stood, stretching my stiff legs, and caught my reflection in the mirror. My eyes were tired but sharp, my braced hand a badge of survival. I wasn't the scared 13-year-old from the garage anymore. I'd spent years observing, learning, building. I'd taught myself audio engineering, turned pain into power, and now I was ready to flip the script. I slipped my notebook back under the floorboard, my fingers brushing the worn pages. Every word in it was a weapon, every recording a bullet. I didn't feel joy, not yet, just a cold, steady resolve. They'd made me invisible, but I was about to become deafening. I climbed into bed, the house quiet now except for the faint clink of dishes downstairs. My mother was probably fussing over table settings, oblivious to the storm I'd built. I closed my eyes, rehearsing my plan. Smile, nod, endure their barbs, then slip away before the first episode dropped. I'd be at the library, my safe haven, watching the downloads tick up, the emails hit inboxes. My family thought tomorrow was about Lily, about their legacy. They were wrong. It was about me, reclaiming everything they'd tried to take. My hand throbbed as I drifted off, but it wasn't pain, it was the pulse of my victory, beating louder than ever. The dining room smelled of rosemary and pretense, the table gleaming with my mother's best china as I stepped into the family gathering, my graduation cap still tucked under my arm. I was 18, hours away from dropping my podcast and sending my evidence to unravel their lies, but for now, I played my part, my braced hand hidden in my sweater pocket. My mother's smile was tight as she waved me in, her eyes flicking to Lily, who was holding court with relatives, her laugh bright and practiced. My father sat at the head of the table, his tie loosened, already sipping whiskey. The room buzzed with cousins, aunts, and family friends, all here to celebrate our achievements, though I knew it was Lily's stage. I braced for the onslaught, my jaw tight, as their condescending questions and backhanded compliments began. "Carly, you actually graduated?" Aunt Karen's voice dripped with surprise, her fork pausing over her salad. "We thought you dropped out, with, you know?" She gestured vaguely at my braced hand, her lips pursed like she'd tasted something sour. I forced a smile, my good hand gripping my glass under the table. "Yep, made it," I said, my voice steady despite the heat rising in my chest. Uncle Ted chimed in, leaning across the table, his breath heavy with wine. "Not like Lily though, valedictorian, right? That's the real deal." He chuckled, and the table nodded, eyes sliding to Lily, who blushed on cue, her hands folded demurely. I bit my tongue, the familiar sting of being erased settling in my bones. My mother circled the table, refilling wine glasses, her voice loud enough to carry. "Carly's always been independent," she said, the word sharp, like it was a flaw. "Not everyone can be a star like our Lily." The room laughed, a polite ripple, and I felt their eyes on me, waiting for me to shrink. I didn't. I nodded, my smile a mask, my braced hand twitching in my pocket. I'd heard this script before, every dinner, every gathering, their words chipping away at me. But tonight, I was different. I knew what was coming. At midnight, my folder of evidence would hit inboxes. An hour later, my podcast would drop. They were digging their own graves, and I was holding the shovel. Lily leaned forward, her voice sweet but pointed. "Carly, you're so quiet tonight. No big plans to share?" Her eyes glinted, like she enjoyed the spotlight's weight on me. I caught the flicker of her phone screen under the table. She was texting, probably about her latest study group deal. I'd recorded her last week, her voice low and nervous, arranging something with that guy from school. It was in episode 3. I shrugged, my good hand brushing a crumb off the table. "Just taking it all in," I said, my tone light but my pulse racing. She smirked, turning back to a cousin's question about her college plans. Harvard, of course. The table erupted in praise and I was invisible again. My father's voice cut through, gruff and impatient. "Carly, stop slouching. At least try to look like you belong here." His eyes were bloodshot, his fingers tapping the table, a nervous tick I'd noted in my notebook. He'd been on edge lately, snapping at creditors over the phone, his business unraveling. I straightened, my braced hand heavy in my lap, and met his gaze. "Sure, Dad," I said, my voice calm but laced with steel. He frowned, like he sensed something off, but turned back to his whiskey. I glanced at my watch. 8:47 p.m. 3 hours until the emails went out, 4 until the podcast hit. My stomach twisted, not with fear but with anticipation. The barrage continued as dessert was served. A family friend, Mrs. Larson, leaned over, her perfume cloying. "Carly, dear, have you thought about a trade school? Something practical?" Her pitying smile was worse than the insults. I nodded, my lips tight, imagining her face when she heard episode 5, where I exposed my mother's charity scam that Mrs. Larson had donated to. "I've got plans," I said, my voice low, my good hand steady as I cut into my pie. They thought they were tearing me down, but each jab was a spark, fueling the fire I'd built over years. I glanced around the table, memorizing their faces, their smugness, their ignorance. They had no idea I'd been recording, observing, waiting. As my mother started a toast to Lily, her glass raised, I slipped my phone from my pocket, checking the encrypted folder one last time. Sent, scheduled, locked. My podcast was queued, the first episode ready to hit at 1 a.m. I leaned back, my braced hand resting on my thigh, and let their voices fade into background noise. They thought this night was about their triumph, their perfect daughter, their untouchable legacy. They were wrong. It was about me, standing in the shadows, ready to pull the curtain down. The dining room chandelier cast a golden glow over the table, but the air turned heavy as my father stood, his whiskey glass raised, his voice booming with authority. I sat rigid. My braced hand clenched in my lap, my good hand gripping the edge of my chair as he launched into his speech. The family gathering now, a stage for their final act of betrayal. It was 9:30 p.m., less than 2 hours until my emails hit inboxes and my podcast dropped. But they didn't know that. They thought they held all the power, and tonight, they'd make it official. I was no longer one of them. Family is everything, my father began, his eyes sweeping the room, lingering on Lily, who sat primly, her hands folded like a saint. But family means loyalty, sacrifice, putting the unit above all else. His gaze landed on me, cold and deliberate, and my stomach twisted, sensing what was coming. My mother stood beside him, her smile brittle, her fingers nervously twisting her necklace. The relatives leaned forward, forks paused, sensing the shift. I kept my face neutral, my pulse hammering as I waited for the blow I knew was inevitable. "Carly," he said, my name like a curse, "you've chosen your own path, one that doesn't align with our values." His voice was steady, but his knuckles whitened around his glass. "You've been a disappointment, always chasing your little hobbies, ignoring what matters." The room went still, aunts and cousins staring, some with pity, others with smug satisfaction. My braced hand throbbed, a ghost of the hammer's impact. But I didn't flinch. I'd heard their whispers for years, but this was public, a formal disowning. My mother's eyes darted away, avoiding mine, while Lily's lips twitched, almost a smirk. He continued, his voice rising, "We've given you everything, shelter, food, a chance to be part of this family, and you've thrown it back in our faces." He gestured at my braced hand as if it were proof of my failure. "You're not like Lily, who's made us proud, who's carried our name forward." The table murmured agreement, heads nodding, and I felt the weight of their judgment, heavy as the hammer had been. My good hand tightened on the chair, nails digging into the wood, but I kept my eyes on him, refusing to look away. "As of tonight," he said, his voice final, "you're no longer welcome in this family, you're on your own." The silence was deafening, broken only by the clink of a spoon as someone shifted uncomfortably. My mother's hand fluttered to her mouth, a performance of shock, but she said nothing. Lily's eyes met mine briefly, a flicker of guilt quickly smothered by her perfect composure. I could feel the room waiting for me to break, to cry, to beg. Instead, I leaned back, my braced hand resting openly on the table now, the scars visible under the brace. "Is that all?" I asked, my voice low but clear, slicing through the tension. My father's jaw tightened, his eyes narrowing, but he didn't respond. He hadn't expected defiance. I stood, my chair scraping the floor, every eye on me. My heart pounded, but my voice was steady. "Good to know where we stand," I said, my gaze sweeping the table, lingering on my mother's averted eyes, Lily's stiff smile, my father's clenched fist. I wanted to scream about the podcast, the emails, the truth about to crash into their lives, but I held back. Let them think they'd won. Let them savor this moment before their world collapsed. I grabbed my graduation cap from the table, my fingers brushing the tassel, and walked toward the door, my steps deliberate, my braced hand swinging freely at my side. As I reached the hallway, Aunt Karen's voice followed, timid but sharp. "Carly, don't make a scene." I paused, my back to them, and let out a soft laugh, bitter and quiet. "Don't worry," I said without turning, "I'm done with your scenes." I stepped outside, the cool night air hitting my face, my phone buzzing in my pocket. A notification. The email folder was processing, set to send in 90 minutes. The podcast would follow, my voice, masked but mine, ready to expose their lies. I glanced back at the house, its windows glowing with their false warmth, and felt a spark of something new. Not just anger, but triumph. I walked to the library, my safe haven, my braced hand heavy but my steps light. They thought they'd cut me off, but they'd only freed me. In an hour, the church board would see my father's business texts, the newspaper would get proof of my mother's charity scam, and Lily's secrets would spill. They'd disowned me, but I was about to disown their legacy. The library's hum was my anchor, the faint glow of its computers casting shadows as I sat in my usual corner, my phone screen lit with the podcast dashboard. It was 1:05 a.m., minutes after my first episode. The Perfect Family went live, and the emails, my digital bombshell of evidence, had hit inboxes across town. I'd slipped out of the family gathering an hour ago, their disowning words still ringing in my ears. But now, as I watched the download counter tick upward, my braced hand steady on the mouse, I felt the ground shift. This was the moment everything changed. The moment my years of silent rage became a roar they couldn't ignore. My phone buzzed, a text from a burner account I'd set up to monitor reactions. A friend from school, one of the few I trusted, had sent a screenshot, a church board member's email thread, already circulating my father's texts about moving funds offshore. "Carly, is this real?" her message read. I didn't reply, my eyes locked on the podcast stats. 47 downloads in 5 minutes, then 92, then 156. My modulated voice, layered to sound like a stranger's, was spilling their secrets. My father's shady deals, my mother's charity fraud, Lily's ties to her school's drug ring, into the world. I leaned back, my good hand brushing my braced one, the ache a faint echo now, drowned out by the rush of seeing my plan unfold. I clicked refresh, and the numbers climbed, 342 downloads. A notification popped up. A local news outlet had opened my email. The subject line, "Monroe Family Fraud," bold and undeniable. I'd included everything. Recordings of my father's late-night calls, screenshots of my mother's bank transfers, even a clip of Lily arranging a deal, her voice nervous but clear. The podcast wove it into a story, each episode a chapter of their hypocrisy, my narration calm but relentless. I'd spent years building this, my braced hand typing through pain, my nights lost to editing in this very library. Now it was alive, and they couldn't stop it. My phone buzzed again. This time a group chat blowing up, classmates, neighbors, people I barely knew. "Did you hear the podcast? Is this about the Monroes? No way, Lily?" I scrolled, my heart racing as the shock spread. Someone posted a link to the podcast's anonymous page, the comment section already alive with speculation. "Sounds like someone close to them," one user wrote. "This is insane," said another. I smiled, my good hand tapping the desk, imagining my family's faces back at the house. They'd be asleep now, oblivious, their phones silent until morning when the notifications hit. My father's smugness, my mother's fake tears, Lily's perfect mask, they'd crack under the weight of their own lies. I opened my laptop, pulling up the second episode, set to drop in 6 hours. It dug deeper, exposing my father's ties to a shady lender, backed by a recording I'd made through his office door. My braced hand rested on the keyboard, scars visible under the brace. A map of why I'd done this. I remembered the garage, the hammer, their silence. They thought they'd broken me, but I'd been listening, learning, waiting. Now, the world was listening too. Another notification. A reporter had replied to my email, requesting a meeting. I ignored it for now, my focus on the dashboard, the downloads hitting 1,027. The library was quiet, but in my head it was deafening, the sound of their empire starting to crumble. I leaned forward, refreshing again, 2,319 downloads. A new comment popped up. "This family's done. Whoever made this, you're a hero." My chest tightened, not with pride but with something fiercer, validation. I'd spent years invisible, my talents dismissed, my pain ignored. Now I was seen, even if they didn't know it was me. My phone lit up with another text, this one from a cousin who'd been at the gathering. "Carly, what's going on? People are freaking out." I didn't respond. Let them panic. Let them scramble when they woke up to their phones exploding, their secrets laid bare. I closed my laptop, the library's silence wrapping around me like a shield. My braced hand felt lighter. The pain a distant hum. I'd done it. Launched the truth, set the spark. By morning, their perfect facade would be ash, and I'd be here watching it burn from the shadows. The podcast was just the beginning. The emails were the blade. They'd disowned me, but I'd disowned their lies, and the world was about to know it. The morning sun barely pierced the library's dusty windows as I sat in my corner, my laptop open, the podcast dashboard glowing with 12,487 downloads and counting. It was 7:23 a.m., hours after the first episode dropped, and my phone buzzed relentlessly. Texts, notifications, chaos erupting as my family's secrets spilled across town. I'd slipped back to the house just before dawn, not to stay, but to witness the fallout, my braced hand steady as I stood in the kitchen doorway, unnoticed, while my family unraveled. Now, back at the library, my heart pounded with a mix of dread and triumph as I prepared to face them one last time, to unmask myself as the architect of their collapse. I'd gone home to find my father pacing the living room, his phone pressed to his ear, voice hoarse as he shouted at someone. A lawyer, maybe, or a creditor. "This is slander," he bellowed, his free hand raking through his hair, his tie undone. My mother sat on the couch, her face pale, scrolling through emails on her tablet, her fingers trembling as she read the church board's response to my evidence. "We're launching an investigation into your charity." Lily was curled in an armchair, her phone abandoned, her eyes red-rimmed as she stared at nothing. The podcast's second episode had just dropped, exposing my father's lender ties, and the comments online were brutal. "The Monroes are finished? Lily's a fraud too?" They hadn't seen me yet, standing in the shadows, my braced hand tucked into my pocket. I stepped into the light, my sneakers soft on the hardwood, and cleared my throat. My father's head snapped up, his eyes wild. "Carly? Where the hell have you been?" he barked, but his voice cracked, fear leaking through. My mother's tablet slipped to her lap, her mouth opening, then closing. Lily's gaze met mine, her lips parting, but no words came. I pulled out my phone, opened the podcast app, and played a clip from the first episode. My modulated voice, calm and cutting. "Behind their perfect smiles lies a web of lies." The room froze, their eyes locked on me, realization dawning. "You," my father whispered, his face draining of color. "You did this?" I nodded, my good hand steady as I set my phone on the coffee table. "Years of listening," I said, my voice low but firm. "Years of you ignoring me, lying, pretending you were untouchable. I recorded everything." My mother gasped, her hand flying to her chest. "Carly, how could you?" she choked out, as if she were the victim. I laughed, sharp and bitter. "How could I? You let him smash my hand, Mom. You praised Lily while I bled. You built this lie and I just told the truth." Lily stood, her hands shaking. "You're ruining us," she said, her voice breaking, but I saw the guilt in her eyes. She knew I'd caught her secrets too. "You ruined yourselves," I shot back, my braced hand rising, scars visible under the brace. "I was invisible to you, but I saw everything. Your business, Dad. Your charity, Mom. Lily's deals, it's all out there now." My father lunged forward, his hand raised, but I didn't flinch. "Go ahead," I said, my voice steel. "Hit me again. It won't change what the world knows." He froze, his hand dropping, his face crumpling as the weight of it hit. I turned to leave, my heart racing, but my steps steady. "The church board has your emails," I said over my shoulder. "The newspaper's running a story tomorrow. You can't hide anymore." My mother's sob followed me, but it wasn't real, just another performance. Lily called my name, her voice small, but I didn't turn back. I walked out, the morning air sharp against my face, my braced hand swinging free. The podcast was at 15,672 downloads now, the comments a wildfire. "This is justice. Whoever this is, thank you." I'd unmasked their hypocrisy, and it felt like breathing for the first time. Back at the library, I refreshed the dashboard, my good hand steady on the mouse. The third episode was queued for tonight, diving into Lily's secrets. My phone buzzed, a reporter wanting a statement, a friend offering support. I ignored them, my focus on the numbers climbing, the truth spreading. They'd disowned me, but I'd dismantled their world. I wasn't done yet, but this moment, watching their shock, their lies exposed, was mine, and it was enough for now. The library's quiet hum felt like a distant memory as I sat in a cozy coffee shop across town, the smell of roasted beans and warm pastries wrapping around me like a hug. It was the afternoon after I'd confronted my family, the podcast now at 28,914 downloads, the truth about their lies spreading like wildfire. My braced hand rested on the table, my good hand curled around a steaming mug, as I laughed with my chosen family, Jada and Marcus, my two closest friends from school, who'd stood by me when no one else did. Their warmth, their realness, was a stark contrast to the cold venom of last night's family gathering, and for the first time in years I felt like I belonged somewhere. Jada leaned forward, her braids swinging as she grinned, her phone open to the podcast's comment section. "Carly, you're a legend," she said, her voice bright but hushed, like we were sharing a secret. "This one comment says, 'This podcast is a reckoning. You did that.'" Marcus, sprawled in the booth across from us, nodded, his usual sarcasm softened by pride. "Yeah, you took down the Monroes like a boss. Bet they're losing it right now." I smiled, my braced hand tapping the table, the ache duller in their company. They didn't know everything, only that I'd made the podcast, not the years of pain behind it. But their support was enough, a lifeline, after the family I'd lost. I glanced out the window, the street bustling with people oblivious to my war. Last night, my family's faces had been a gallery of shock. My father's rage crumbling, my mother's fake tears, Lily's guilt. Here, with Jada and Marcus, it was different. Jada reached across, squeezing my good hand. "You okay?" she asked, her eyes searching mine. I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. "Better than okay," I said, my voice steady. "You guys, you're my real family." Marcus snorted, but his eyes were soft. "Damn right, blood's overrated." We ordered another round of coffee, the barista calling out names as the shop filled with chatter. Jada pulled up a news article on her phone, the headline screaming, "Monroe family under investigation for fraud." My mother's charity scam was front-page news, my father's shady deals detailed in black and white. I skimmed it, my braced hand still, remembering the moment I'd sent those emails. Marcus leaned over, reading aloud. "Authorities are reviewing evidence of embezzlement," he whistled. "Carly, you didn't just expose them, you buried them." I laughed, a real laugh, the kind I hadn't felt in years, my good hand brushing a stray hair from my face. The contrast hit me hard. Last night the dining room had been a battlefield, my family's words like shrapnel. "You're a disappointment," my father had said, disowning me in front of everyone. Their table was polished, their smiles fake, their love conditional. Here, the coffee shop's worn wooden table was cluttered with crumbs, Jada's half-eaten scone, Marcus's spilled sugar packets. But it was honest. Jada's teasing about my secret spy skills, Marcus's bad jokes. They saw me, not as a shadow or a failure, but as Carly, the girl who fought back. My braced hand, once a symbol of shame, felt lighter, like it belonged here too. Jada scrolled through more comments, her voice rising with excitement. "Listen to this. Whoever made this podcast, you're giving survivors a voice." My chest tightened, not with pain, but with something new, purpose. I'd started this for revenge, for the girl in the garage whose hand was smashed, but it was bigger now. People were listening, connecting, sharing their own stories in the comments. I sipped my coffee, the warmth spreading through me, and thought of the third episode, live now, exposing Lily's secrets. The downloads were climbing, the truth unstoppable. As we laughed over Marcus's terrible impression of my father, my phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number, probably a reporter. I ignored it, my focus on Jada's grin, Marcus's arm slung over the booth. Last night, I'd walked away from a family that never wanted me. Today I sat with people who chose me, who celebrated me. The podcast was my weapon, but this warmth, this laughter, was my victory. My braced hand rested on the table, scars and all, and for the first time, I didn't hide it. The coffee shop's warmth lingered in my chest as I walked home alone that evening, the streetlights flickering on, my braced hand swinging lightly at my side. The podcast was at 41,203 downloads, the news about my family's fraud spreading faster than I'd imagined. But my mind was on the texts lighting up my phone, my mother's pleas, my father's threats, Lily's single shaky "I'm sorry." They were scrambling, trying to claw their way back into my life after I'd exposed their lies, but I was done letting them in. That night, in my small rented room across town, I sat on my bed, my notebook open, and set the boundaries that would define my new world, my braced hand steady as I wrote the rules I'd live by. My phone buzzed again, my mother's name flashing. "Carly, we need to talk, this is tearing us apart." I stared at the screen, her words a hollow echo of the woman who'd stood silent when my hand was crushed. I didn't reply. Instead, I blocked her number, my good hand moving with calm precision. My father's text came next, all caps. "You'll regret this." I could picture his red face, his fist clenched, but he was powerless now. The evidence was public, the investigation's rolling. I blocked him too, my breath steady, the weight of their control lifting. Lily's message lingered longer, her apology almost human, but I remembered her smirk at the gathering, her years of basking in their praise while I faded. I blocked her too, my braced hand resting on the notebook, its pages a testament to why I'd never go back. I opened my laptop, the podcast dashboard glowing. Comments poured in. "You're so brave." This gave me the courage to speak up. My plan had been revenge, but it was becoming something more, a beacon for others who'd been silenced. I leaned back against the wall, my small room bare but mine, no trace of their lies here. I'd moved out right after graduation, scraping together babysitting money and a part-time job at the library to afford this place. It wasn't much. A creaky bed, a second-hand desk, but it was my fortress, a space where their voices couldn't reach me. I wrote in my notebook, not their secrets this time, but my boundaries. No contact, no guilt, no looking back. My braced hand ached as I gripped the pen, but it felt like strength, not pain. I'd spent years observing their hypocrisy, recording their lies, but now I was building something new. Rules to protect the life I was claiming. If they reached out through others, I'd shut it down. If they tried to spin the narrative, I'd let the podcast speak. My good hand traced the notebook's edge, remembering the nights I'd hidden it, terrified they'd find it. Now it was just a tool, like the recorder still tucked in my bag, ready for whatever came next. My phone buzzed again, a cousin, probably sent by my mother. "Carly, they're sorry. Can't you talk?" I didn't hesitate, blocking the number. My family thought apologies could erase years of neglect, the hammer, the disowning. They were wrong. I stood, pacing the small room, my sneakers soft on the worn carpet. The news had escalated, reporters were circling, the church board demanding answers, my father's business partners cutting ties. I'd seen a post on X, "Monroe family exposed, karma's real." I didn't smile, but I felt it, a quiet satisfaction not in their pain but in my freedom. I sat at my desk, pulling up the next podcast episode set to drop tomorrow. It was about my mother's charity scam, detailed with recordings I'd risked everything to get. I tweaked the audio, my braced hand clumsy but sure, the work grounding me. This was my power now, telling the truth, setting boundaries, choosing who got to be in my life. Jada and Marcus were my family, their laughter from the coffee shop still echoing in my mind. My biological family? They were ghosts, and I was done haunting myself with. As I saved the episode, my phone lit up with an email from a lawyer I'd contacted, confirming they'd received my evidence and were pursuing action. I leaned back, my braced hand resting on my chest, feeling my heart beat. They'd tried to break me, but I'd built this instead. A life where I decided who stayed, who mattered. My room was small, but it was enough. I was enough. The late afternoon sun streamed through the cracked blinds of my rented room as I stood at my desk, a letter in my hand from a local foundation for abuse survivors, confirming a grant I'd applied for months ago. My braced hand trembled slightly, not from pain, but from the weight of what it meant. $50,000 to rebuild my life, and I knew exactly how to use it. My family's foreclosed home, the colonial where I'd endured years of neglect, where my father's hammer had shattered my hand, was up for auction, and I was going to buy it. Not to live in their shadow, but to reclaim it, to turn a place of pain into a symbol of my triumph. My good hand folded the letter carefully, my heart steady as I began this final act of taking back my legacy. I'd seen the foreclosure notice online weeks ago, a stark headline on a local news site, "Monroe family loses home amid scandal." The podcast, now at 73,192 downloads, had done its work. My father's shady deals exposed, my mother's charity scam unraveled, Lily's secrets laid bare. Their empire was gone, their name tarnished, and the house, once their pride, was just a hollow shell now. I drove to the auction that morning, my beat-up car rattling, my braced hand on the wheel. The courthouse steps were crowded, reporters, curious neighbors, a few bidders, but I stood tall, my grant approval tucked in my bag, my resolve sharper than ever. The auctioneer's voice droned, listing the house's features like it was still a prize. I saw it differently. The garage where my hand was broken, the dining room where they'd disowned me, the bedroom where I'd hidden my notebook. Each memory was a scar, but I wasn't here to mourn. I was here to rewrite the story. When the bidding started, I raised my good hand, my voice clear. $45,000. Heads turned, whispers rippling. Carly Monroe, the outcast, bidding on her family's ruin. A man in a suit countered, then another, but I kept going, my braced hand steady in my lap until my final bid, $49,500, landed like a gavel. The auctioneer nodded. Sold. I signed the paperwork in a daze, my good hand scrawling my name, my braced hand resting on the table, scars visible. The clerk, an older woman, glanced at it, then at me, her eyes soft. "Good for you, honey," she whispered. I nodded, my throat tight, and walked out into the sunlight, the keys to the house heavy in my pocket. I drove there alone, parking in the driveway, the for sale sign still staked in the overgrown lawn. The house loomed, its white paint peeling, windows dark. I stepped inside, the air stale, the silence heavy with ghosts. I wandered through the rooms, my sneakers echoing on the hardwood. The dining room table was gone, but I could still see my father's clenched fist, my mother's averted eyes, Lily's smirk. In the garage I paused, my braced hand brushing the workbench where the hammer had lain. I didn't flinch. Instead, I pictured what this place could be. A studio maybe, where I'd record podcasts, not of revenge but of hope, for survivors like me. I'd turn these walls into a sanctuary, a place where pain became power. My good hand traced the doorframe, my mind already sketching plans, soundproofing microphones, a space to create. Back in my room I pulled out my notebook, not to record their secrets but to plan my future. The grant would cover the house and renovations, leaving enough to fund my next project, a podcast series for survivors, sharing their stories, building a community. I wrote furiously, my braced hand aching but steady, ideas spilling onto the page. I wasn't just reclaiming the house, I was reclaiming the Monroe name, not as theirs but as mine. Carly Monroe, the girl who didn't break, who built something better. My phone buzzed, a text from Jada. "You got the house, you're a badass." I smiled, my good hand typing a quick reply. "It's mine now." The podcast comments were still pouring in, people calling me a hero, while sharing their own stories of overcoming. I wasn't their outcast anymore. I was my own legacy. The house, once their fortress, was my victory, a place where I'd create, heal, and thrive. The late evening light filtered through the bare windows of my newly purchased house, casting long shadows across the empty living room as I stood in the center, my braced hand resting on a second-hand chair I'd brought in that morning. The air smelled of dust and memory, but for the first time, it didn't choke me. The podcast had hit 92,417 downloads. My family's legacy was in ruins, and I'd turned their house of pain into my own, a place where I could finally breathe. I sat down, my good hand tracing the chair's worn fabric, and let myself reflect, not on their betrayal, but on the peace I'd found in knowing my worth wasn't tied to their approval. I thought back to the girl in the garage, 13, her hand shattered, her family's silence louder than her screams. That girl had been invisible, her dreams dismissed, her pain ignored. I'd carried her for years, her anger fueling my notebook, my recordings, my podcast. But now, standing in this house, I saw her differently. Not as a victim, but as a survivor who'd built something unstoppable. My braced hand, once a symbol of their cruelty, was just a part of me now, like my voice, my resolve, my truth. I didn't need their love to be whole. I'd found that in myself, in Jada and Marcus, in the strangers online who called my podcast their lifeline. I walked to the kitchen, my sneakers echoing in the empty space, and pictured it filled with life. Friends laughing, music playing, a microphone on the counter for my next project. The grant money was already funding renovations, and I'd started sketching plans for a studio in the garage, where I'd record stories of other survivors, not just my own. The podcast had been my weapon, but it was also my bridge, connecting me to people who'd felt what I had, who'd been silenced but were ready to speak. I opened my laptop, the screen glowing with new comments. "You gave me courage. I'm leaving my toxic family because of you." My chest tightened, not with pain but with purpose. I thought of my family, scattered now, my father facing charges, my mother shunned by her church, Lily hiding from the fallout. I didn't feel joy at their ruin, just a quiet release. They'd tried to define me, to break me, but I'd rewritten the story. This house, their pride, was mine now, not to haunt, but to heal. I stepped into the garage, the air cool and still, and stood where the hammer had fallen. I closed my eyes, letting the memory surface, the pain, the betrayal, the silence. Then I let it go, my braced hand steady, my breath even. I wasn't that girl anymore. I was Carly Monroe, and I was enough. Back in the living room I sat again, my good hand pulling out my notebook, its pages no longer a ledger of their sins but a map of my future. I wrote down ideas, a podcast series, a community center, a place for survivors to create. My braced hand rested on the page, the ache a faint reminder, not of loss but of what I'd gained. I'd turned their weapon into my strength, their house into my home, their name into my legacy. The peace wasn't in their downfall, it was in knowing I didn't need them to shine. I leaned back, the chair creaking, and looked out the window at the darkening sky. The world was still out there, noisy and chaotic, but in here, I was steady. I'd found my voice, my place, my truth. And that was victory enough. Have you ever had to redefine what family means to you? I used to think it was blood, but I learned it's the people who see you, who lift you up, who stay when it's hard. My journey wasn't just about exposing lies, it was about finding my worth, building a life where I decide who matters. If my story hit home, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs to hear that it's okay to define success on your own terms. Drop a comment below. Tell me your story, where you're finding your strength. Together, we can keep the conversation going, lift each other up, and make sure no one feels invisible. You're not alone, and you're enough. Just as you are.